All right, well, let's get started. Thank you everyone for attending today's webinar, Understanding Property Values and Renewable Energy Projects, hosted by Strategic Economic Research. I'm Ethan Loomis, Vice President of Marketing and Sales here at Strategic Economic Research, or SER. If you have any questions about today's webinar or want to learn more about SER, please feel free to message me. A few housekeeping items. This session will be recorded and shared with everyone who registered when the recording is ready. We will have time for Q&A at the end, so please feel free to drop your questions in the Q&A feature. We'll do our best to answer all of them, and again, that'll be after all of our presentations here at the beginning of the webinar. And without further ado, I'm going to kick it over to Dr. Gilbert Michaud to start us off.
Sounds good. Thanks, Ethan. Thanks for the invite. I'm assuming you'll be sharing our slides. Beautiful. Alrighty. Very good. Thanks, folks. Thanks for being here. As noted, I'm Gilbert Michaud. I'm an assistant professor of environmental policy at Loyola University here in Chicago. Pleased to be with you all today to talk about some of this property value research that we've been working on over the years. If you could move to the next slide, Ethan. So just a very brief introduction. Again, I'm a professor here at Loyola. I used to be a professor at Ohio University at the Public Service, Public Affairs School, where I did a lot of applied and engaged research as well. I also have an appointment at the University of Michigan at the Ford School over there. So I am not from the Great Lakes region or the Midwest, but I've been here for the past about 10 years or so, doing a lot of this applied and engaged research on energy policy and economic development with developers, with local officials, with landowners, and many other folks in communities. I'm an economist by trade. My PhD is in public policy. And again, I've done a lot of work sort of out in the community, which makes it fun for me and the students as well. Next slide, please. So yeah, so my work, broadly speaking, as you probably know, and the topic of today's webinar and what SER does as well is focus on the energy transition. We've been seeing, the decommissioning, for instance, of things like coal-fired power plants over the years. And so the question has become, how can we meet energy demand, right? Maybe in a more sustainable way. So we've been seeing the advent of these large utility scale renewable energy projects, wind farms, solar farms, these types of things over the past decade or so. Costs have gone down dramatically. There's different policy incentives that are helping drive these projects to be developed as well, tax exemptions, et cetera. And there's a lot of business demand, as folks probably know as well. So tech companies, hospitals, universities, Loyola, we're 100% renewable energy powered as of last year, which is very exciting. So we have signed a power purchase agreement with a large scale solar project just south of Springfield, Illinois. So there's a lot of demand side drivers for the development of these projects. And again, like I said, I teach energy law and policy and do normal academic work, but I'm also out in the community very often, talking to local officials and answering, tough research questions as, today's topic focused on property values and other things to help them be better prepared when they get approached about a project. Next slide, please. So this is a bit cliche perhaps, but just to visually sort of look at what this trend has been over time. 20, 25 years ago, we were building a lot more natural gas plants, for instance, to provide electricity generation to folks. If you zoom into the past 5, 10 years or so, we're seeing a lot more wind, solar, and storage. We're seeing a lot of solar in particular, and roughly 60 to 65% of all the new not only property values, but economic impacts, wildlife impacts, and many other things as well. Next slide, please. So we've done a lot of work over the years, going to public hearings, investigating public comments. This is a big body of my research as we're sort of studying the political economy and sort of social acceptance, et cetera, of these large scale projects. Here's a couple snapshots from the state of Wisconsin, where you can actually go and download public comments. You can do this in some states that have a centralized state citing agency, especially Ohio, Kentucky, a few other states. So this is just right from the PSC, and you can, find the comments that people are submitting and sort of specifically analyze them. So we've done a lot of work, again, like going to hearings in person and sort of maybe more anecdotally trying to discern what people are talking about as it relates to large scale project development. And we've also done a lot of work investigating like the written comments specifically. If you could move to the next slide. So yeah, this has been a broader body of work again, focused on this sort of text-based analysis to try to better discern what people are talking about, sort of taking it beyond the anecdote that people, hey, everyone's talking about property values. We've actually done a lot of work to quantify that exactly. And so we've used tools like Voyant and other things to look at frequencies and develop word clouds and that type of thing. If you could move to the next slide. So these are the big sort of thematic areas that we've seen over the years of doing this research. They're in alphabetical order, not in order of frequency. But you can see they're second to last noted property values, right? So impacts to local housing prices and that type of thing. This is one of the major themes that we've seen, again, at the hearings and in these submitted comments that we've been analyzing. Definitely a major concern among homeowners and folks in the communities. It's definitely frequently cited as a reason for project opposition. And so, this sort of stimulated Sampson and I, and I'm going to have Sampson, my colleague, introduce himself in a second, to study this, a few years ago as part of a project specifically. We wanted to sort of take it beyond, these, I think this will impact my property value kind of discussion, and actually empirically study this as we do as academics. If you could move to the next slide, please. We were seeing, some of these types of quotes. This is just from Wisconsin, looking at some of the comments up there. Out of 2,245 comments that we assessed, 471 of them mentioned some type of property value theme, which is, roughly what, 20% or so of the commenters talking about property values. So again, this is a major theme that people are bringing up in these comments as it relates to solar development. And we also did some sentiment analysis, right? So we tried to better discern, how is the sentiment around these types of comments related to property values, and it was very much a negative thing. So I see this as, something that people have a lot of questions about, or maybe just think that this is going to impact their property value. If you could move to the next slide, Ethan. But we wanted to, again, like I said, as academics, study this more pointedly as sort of like stewards to the communities and the folks that we're working with, right? So we sort of spelled this out. What is the association here, and what is the magnitude of impact between these large-scale solar projects and nearby property values? We wanted to do this in the Midwestern area because that's where we live and work. But also because there's a lot of project development in the region, given the flat, sunny land that exists, which is good for farming crops, if you will, right? And is also good for building solar projects. And a lot of interesting debates around siting and what this sort of looks like. If you could move to the next slide. And so, we did a literature review, of course, trying to sort of understand, okay, what are the different things that impact property values and housing prices in terms of amenities and disamenities? And this can be as broad as, bedrooms and bathrooms and property size, amenities nearby, art centers and different things like that. But we did also sort of dive specifically into large scale solar, utility scale solar reports that have been done. And we found, and again, it's cliche, but we found pretty mixed results, right? Most of these studies said, this is a pretty insignificant thing. Maybe there's a slight negative impact. There's a couple studies out there that suggest, this might decrease property values by 0.5% or something like that. But of course, there's like a lot of differences in these studies. There are, consultant or academic reports for one specific project. There's different reports out there that focus on states like Rhode Island, which is like clearly very different than all the Midwestern states. So there's a lot of differences by project size. What kinds of projects are we looking at in terms of capacity, by geography, and by methods as well. So this sort of led us to this gap to say, hey, we want to study this. We want to look across all the Midwest, not at just one project. And as I turn it over to Sampson here in a minute, he'll explain that we looked at 70 different projects across the Midwestern states. Just as a little teaser here, we actually published this 2 years ago in 2024. You can see an Elsevier Solar Compass on the bottom right-hand side of your screen. There's the title if you're interested, and also the link at the bottom of your screen if you're interested in reading the entire paper. So I say all this to sort of, tee things up for Sampson and say, there's a lot of reasons that we wanted to do this project and that this is, really important for us to study property values. And now I will turn it over to you, Sampson, to talk more about data, methods, and results.
Hey everyone, my name is Sampson, and I work with Dr. Gilbert Michaud from 2021 to 2023. I especially started working on this paper around year 2022 or so. After graduate school, I was working at Pine Gate Renewables, joined Recurrent Energy as a project manager now since 2024. Currently, I'm also serve on the board of directors for the American Solar Energy Society, which is a nonprofit that's educating solar for all and sustainability initiatives. Next slide, please. Just one other reason why I felt this research could be important is that I was able to read a lot of similar property value impact studies that was either done on a specific projects, which sometimes, as you know, rural communities have very few properties to begin with to do those assessments, or it's done by bigger labs that's looking at tens of thousands of projects, varies in size. Most of them are looking at project from 1 megawatt and up. And as you know, a lot of those 1-2 megawatt project can be situated at very different pockets in terms of the areas that they would be located in. So they're not really, in my mind, looking at all the utility scale solar project, at least in my previous readings. So for this project, we're looking at data from the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. It was from the year of 2022. Actually, at that time, there just simply wasn't that big of a data set, as not many utility scale solar projects at that moment of time have been commissioned yet. So, but we're still able to find 83 projects. Among those projects, 70 of them are unique because some project could be separated into different phases, especially for those utility scale project or some community solar project between 5 to 20 megawatts. Most of them are in that 5 to 20 megawatt range. However, we are able to find about 20% of them being more than 20 megawatt. That's well into that utility scale solar range. And it's across all Midwest states. Only North Dakota, South Dakota, at that moment of time, doesn't have utility scale solar project commission. So we're trying to collect as many states that have those projects as possible. Next slide, please. Yeah, so this is kind of a very preliminary but example that we have on how those data and data points were collected. Obviously, we need to know the operation date, as timeline in this process is very important. We're trying to understand how does property value change before and after. We're for simplistic purpose and also as an assumption, we assume a 12-month construction period. So understanding what the operation date is from the data that we have and push back 12 months earlier and see and use that as kind of a construction timeline. And then we compare the property value changes 5 years before construction versus everything after the project that goes into operation. As you guys can see, this table is just being one of the examples on, how those kind of tables and data collection process are being set up. Next slide, please. And how that actually get input into Excel is a little bit further complicated in terms of how many rows and columns it would contain. So for a single project, in this example, we're looking at one of the 70 project that is included. we essentially have a control and treatment group. The treatment group being in the nearby areas, but are further from the project. Namely, in this case, for this specific example, we're looking at a zip code level. So the treatment group are the ones that are, in this case, within the zip code of where the project is located. And the control is, in this case, where it is at a nearby zip code that were randomly selected, but were not associated with the project. And then there's other variables that are important for the project, like rurality of this project, the sizing, and then the geographical location and things like that for us to kind of test things around and see if we can draw other conclusions as well. Next slide, please. So among the 70 project, we're able to generate about over 20,000 data points. And then because in some areas, there were just so few property sales that we're not able to find any data to account for. So only about, but still we're able to find about 94% of those data that we could associate with a housing value. AHV stands for average housing value in this case. And in this case, after we run the model using a difference in difference method, we're actually finding a very small positive effect that associated with having the project and nearby property values. Next slide, please. And alongside with this main finding, we're also able to find a couple other interesting findings. First is, site selections, right? Because we're looking at rurality, we're looking at property value, we're looking at housing values in the areas that have solar versus the nearby that does not, right? And the first one that I was, at that time as a student, not even a developer, was curious is what solar developer choose areas that have average housing value to develop solar project. And the answer that we find was a little bit of a significant, that the housing value to begin with, before the project was even constructed, was a little bit lower. And that draw the kind of the conclusion of maybe that is the case, because that's part of the siting process of evaluating site controls, lease options, purchase options as part of the development process. Next slide, please. And then, to what magnitude do utility scale solar affect nearby property values? I think in this case, although that, we actually showed some level of positivity and statistical significance, but I think it actually overall aligned with most other papers in the sense that although it is statistically significant, but it is well within the margins that, a lot of other factors could influence the housing values. And it is significant, but it's within the margins. And there could be potential reasons for this, right? Like, as we all know, utility scale solar generate millions of dollars in terms of tax revenue over the project lifetime. That for many states, most of those tax dollars goes to school district, and school district have a very strong association with property values. So there are many indirect causes that could make this case being reasonable. Next slide, please. Yeah. So overall, some of our findings suggest that stakeholders should be less concerned about their property value decrease due to utility scale solar development, as it is a very complicated matters where there usually will require many variables, and other variables that's outside of solar development could impact their property value sometimes a lot more. The results are similar, to prior study, like I just said, in terms of the magnitude of impact with utility scale solar development nearby. Results are different. We're showing a little bit positive. Some study, like Dr. Michaud said, show a little bit negative, but they're all kind of within the margin. And, other other key was, the number of projects that were examined, right? We've seen many reports during the permitting process. Usually project developer would find some assessor to assess that specific project. We felt like our paper is unique in the sense that we evaluate not just one, but several projects, all projects that we could find within the region. Next slide. I'm pretty sure that's all for me. Thanks.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mike Maroos. I am president of Maroos and Company, and I come from the appraisal background. I hold the MAI and the CRE designations. And today I'm just going to explain a little bit about what we do. And what you've just heard is, the conclusions, and the conclusions basically follow the data. So we have a staff of 8. Joey Maroos works heavily in the renewable energy field, preparing reports, doing the research. I assist with it, and primarily, along with that, interface with the clients and attend the hearings and testify. So over probably the last 30 years, I've done over probably 300 property value impact studies involving many different type of assets, including, development of industrial facilities, churches, mixed-use facilities, anything that requires a zoning change. In the last 10 years, been very active in the renewable energy field throughout, heavily in the Midwest, but probably 15 states total, and been involved in probably 150 projects where ours is generally site specific, looking at, the specific project, the footprint, the KMZ. Then we look at the sound studies. It started out heavier in wind. As you've just heard, solar has kind of taken a front row seat the last couple of years. Now battery storage has ramped up, and they all have unique situations. And natural gas to electric is the new one, just because there's an insatiable demand for power. So what do? We first look at the proposed development, look at the proposed study. We review the county documents, review the demographics, which is very important, and look at sales transactions, market activity in the market, in the other areas where the counties have had similar type development. Also, review objector studies, reports, and concerns. Many times we'll look at some of their blogs and their websites to understand what they do. And then, very importantly, the next slide, please, make an inspection of the area, the footprint of the comparable sales that we think are appropriate and proximate to the property. We interview participants not in the subject area, because we find calling or talking or interviewing a broker is really unfair in a local project area, because if we cite their name, some of the objectors take offense and basically try and destroy that individual's business. So we generally don't go back and do our interviews with the immediate area until after the project is done. What we found starting 6-7 years ago is personally contacting assessors and interviewing them in areas that actually have, whether it be solar or wind or battery storage, to see what experiences they've had. Have they had objections? Have they had formal tax appeals? Have they had hearings? And when they do their own independent research, are they finding transactions are negatively impacted? And what's been fascinating is the initial concern was negative until they start getting the data, and still they start seeing transactions. And I've spoken with probably over 125 assessors in regard to solar and almost as many with wind. And basically, the conclusions are there's no data out there that negatively impacts value. In fact, and you'll hear from Dr. Loomis next, is the positive economics of these projects are so significant to the school districts, to the road commissions, to the taxing bodies, plus the jobs they provide, the infrastructure that they add, turns out to be a positive, just not to the participants that are getting land rent or selling their property, but to the township and generally the county in general. I have on this bottom inspections, and inspections of the area are always interesting because I found in one solar project where there was concern, a looming coal plant in the background with smoke coming out of the stacks, dark smoke. It was an older plant, 50-foot stack of coal, plus trains coming in. In other areas, we'll find hog containment farms. And if you're downwind, it's not a pleasant situation. And you find kind of care and maintenance of the area. And are they gravel roads? Are they paved roads? What's the condition and the economic vitality of the nearby communities? Do they have proper hospitals, medical infrastructure with schools and the other support? Next slide, please. So, basically that boots on the ground really is helpful when we look at the factors that impact the all renewable energy, just not solar. We look at other development in the agricultural community, whether it be an ethanol plant, grain storage facilities, commercial greenhouses, hog farms, dairy farms, poultry farms. I mean, a hog farm, they're taking the hogs out every 6 months, and there's 100 per truckload. And obviously, there's issues with water contamination, smell, and somewhat similar situations with the smell and the other issues with dairy farms and noise. Poultry farms, similar, quarries, and then wind and solar. But with every one, you look at setbacks, you look at the visual issues, you look at the trend of development. We also look at land values. And clearly, when you look at, let's say, Illinois land values at, with good soil of 8 to a great soil of 15,000 an acre, it's pretty productive. But if you have wind on there, or if you have solar, because of the significant revenue generations, you have increased values. You're taking land out of production, which means actually there's less land to lease for the ag uses, and it drives up values. Next, please. So, and this I just used a solar farm as an example, and obviously there's the environmental benefits, and it's also providing support for our new, world as we see it with the AI driven by the data centers. The other issue with this use is you basically have no sound, you have no smell. It's something a lot different than a lot of the other energy sources that we're used to with the fossil fuels. And there are really no hazardous materials, toxins, or associated odors. So it's a benefit. The infrastructure I talked about before, it makes consistency with the power grid, and it provides economic benefit to the community. The real estate taxes, as Dr. Loomis will get into for the schools, is very important, whether it be the new air conditioning, the new gym, better teachers. The more desirable the education into a community, the higher the values. Public safety, we get into an issue. So a subdivision, residential subdivision, is going to have need for fire. It's going to have need for services for snow plowing, potential police, where you get into a solar farm and a wind farm, there's really no demand for those issues. Next slide, please. So you heard previously about these large scale studies, which we review, and there's 7 or 8 peer-reviewed studies where they have significant amount of data. That's something we consider. Also consider heavily the assessors, individual interviews with them and their analysis. But traditionally, as an appraiser, we do a matched pair analysis, which basically is taking a sales transaction in a similar type area to the proposed development of a property that's proximate either to a turbine or a solar array, and going in the same area and trying to match up a transaction of a similar property, similar age, similar size of the house, similar modernization, similar outbuildings, similar lot size, and basically do an adjustment grid to see if there's any negative impact. So with the adjustment grids, we and I go personally visit just to get the feel. And it's always interesting that most in the agricultural community, they will have visual barriers around the residential property to block them from the wind, from the dirt that comes off the adjoining farm fields. So their sight lines are generally not that great, but I'm looking to see how close are the turbines, as an example. And, rule of thumb is 13 to 1,500 feet or 2 times tip height. We have the noise levels, which are generally by statute. We have shadow flicker. And I think one of the big benefits that's come into play in the last few years is the ADLS, which is the lighting systems that basically shuts down the lights unless you got a small plane flying, and that only goes on for 7 or 8 minutes, probably 2% of the time. With solar, generally 150 feet is required from the tip of the house to the start of the solar array. I prefer 200 feet, but we also look to see, is it multi-sided? I've seen some situations where they have 3-sided, and I'd made a strong recommendation to the developer, and they modify. They can modify by greater setbacks. They can modify by providing additional screening and landscaping. So it goes the combination where the match pairs are extremely helpful. And one of the problems, as you heard earlier, that some of these rural communities, there's not a lot of transactions. A lot of the properties will stay in a family for 100, 150 years. They'll go from one generation to another. So as an appraiser, those transactions usually are not fit the definition of market value. So we try and use sales that weren't unduly influenced or interfamily. And the data is limited. And that's why, besides the matched pairs, we have to go to these other areas to be able to come to a conclusion. Next slide. So when we look at, the property types or the food types here, solar energy, utility, goes anywhere from what I would call 50 to 1,000 megawatts. Basically sit on 5 acres per megawatt. Then you get into setbacks and shape of the property, and then role of the property and the visuals of the property and how the impact is. As you've heard, the studies show properly done, there's no negative impact. Why are there objectors? People don't like change. People are jealous of their neighbors. Farm tenants are not happy because it's taken land out of production, and they know their rents are going to go up. But that's like with any tenant, whether you rent office space or you're an apartment tenant, that you don't have the full property rights. There's another push about taking prime farmland out of production, but if you sell 1,000 acres for a residential development, it's out of production. If you do for solar, it's a 30 to 35-year deal, which is generally, a long-term CRP, which is the crop restoration program where the farmers get paid by the government not to farm. And it actually produces better soil in the long run. Wind projects, again, the lighting was an issue. You see the blinking red lights now, that's under better control. The density has gone down. We first started looking at them, they were 0.5 megawatt to 1 megawatt. They're 300 to 350 feet tall. Now they're 4 to 6 plus megawatts, and they're 550 to 650 feet tall. But the density has gone down where you can have one turbine handle what 5 turbines used to have. So you got significant density, which to me is a huge benefit. And the higher up the blades, the quieter they are, and to me, the less impactful. Again, setbacks is an issue, and there's a lot of complaints and wind throw and all kinds of other issues. And, we rely on other experts on that. Battery storage is basically many times constructed right in the middle of an existing solar farm, so there's setbacks. The noise, again, you can have 200 megawatts basically sitting in maybe a 7 to 10 acre site. Generally, they have to put a fence around it. They have other visual buffers at somewhere 700 to 800 feet. The noise is generally not really audible. Other projects we've been involved with, the transmission lines, natural gas to electric, data centers are all have their own unique characteristics and feelings from communities. One of the things that Ethan had brought up, hearings. So I've been probably to 200 hearings because some of these hearings will go over multiple nights. And a typical thing that we see is jealousy, fear of change, then bringing up incorrect allegations, unsupportable fact, then get into certain nuances as to impact on livestock, cattle, which all of these are not proven at all. And they generally are negative to the positive, to the infrastructure of the community. They basically don't want to hear. Now, there's some people that are out there for education, which is a benefit. The other negative that some try and do is to have greater setbacks. And at some point, that kills the deal because it makes it uneconomic. And the other issue that they try and do is impact the time. They want to impact the construction hours. And the reality is any construction project, whether it is building an industrial building, a commercial building, a church, is going to have traffic going in and out. It's going to have noise. And so that's really not an impact on value. In fact, we do a lot of condemnation work, and that's non-compensable damages during construction. So there's many stories I can share, but I think we've touched on, kind of the highlights of what we do and going to attend the hearings. Next slide, please. And this slide is just kind of summarizing what some of the things we into the value impact. Sometimes, part of the acquisition, what can they pay to rent? What can they buy? Pay to buy out an objector. Then getting into consulting in regard to lawsuits. We've had multiple with wind, multiple with solars throughout multiple states. And then easement value and damage analysis, based on the transmission lines. And then obviously testimony before all kinds of different boards, commissions, state boards, zoning boards of appeal. And they're all in a way is kind of like going to court, but some are better controlled than others. Some have a strong presence, basically bring in a retired judge to run the hearing. Some lose control or are negative to the development and basically don't have a fair proceeding, which just opens them up to a vulnerability of a possible lawsuit. Next. So with that, I'll paste it on to a gentleman that I've probably been in 30 to 50 different projects with, Dr. David Loomis.
Thank you, Mike. We do spend a lot of time together at those hearings. I thank you to our other presenters. This has been great. My name is David Loomis. Next slide. And I am president of Strategic Economic Research. And I'm also professor emeritus of economics at Illinois State University. And as Mike has said, we've been together for a lot of these permit hearings. And we've done a number of analyses of economic impacts for projects, and I think that slide is out of date. I think we're up to 42 different states, so we can do analyses pretty much in any state and any technology: wind, solar, battery storage, data centers, transmission lines, natural gas plants, and the like. So we have a wide range of expertise. And next slide. We put together these reports, and this is just a look at the report. Our role at SER in this is to give decision makers the information that they need to make an informed decision. So we'll have background information on the wind and solar industry, so that decision makers that this may be the first wind, solar, battery storage, transmission project that's in their county that they've had to face. So giving them a little bit more information of context of what's happening, that this isn't just everybody thinks that their community is unique and singled out for this project, but this is happening all over the country. We also give background on their county economics, because what we found was that people don't know really the trending over time. So we'll just provide graphs of their county, what's happening to employment over time. And in many rural counties, employment numbers are declining and population is declining. And that's causing some real trade-offs that rural communities are having to make as they seek workers and tax revenue. We also put together a property tax analysis that's fairly unique in the industry, and that helps communities really judge the value of the project in terms of those hard dollars that will come in as a result of the project to all the different taxing entities. And then we do an economic impact analysis that looks at jobs, earnings, and output for both the local area, typically the county, and then the state as a whole. What is the impact that this is going to make in terms of availability of jobs? And we try and do that analysis specific to the community. Next slide. So typically we will have a summary slide like this that will go year by year, because as you can see, there's a decline over time. And so just providing the first year property tax number is a bit inaccurate, because typically there is some depreciation involved. These will decline over time. And while it's not significant on a year by year basis, you can see that there's only a few, less than 1% that it declines. in a given from year to year, but over time, over the length of a project that might last 30, 35 years, those declines can be quite significant. So what starts out at $2.4 million in annual property taxes go down to just over $1 million, and in this case, rise again. So we provide the year by year, we give the total, we give the annual average. Next slide. And then we'll look at specifically how much is the county going to receive from this in terms of the county general fund. How much do the townships get? How much the MTA is a multi-township assessment district. How much do they get? And we'll break this out for schools, for community colleges, road districts. Every single taxing district will get their number and be able to look on a year-by-year basis as to what those projections are for property taxes. And the reason I'm highlighting that in the case here as we're talking about property values is that there is this interplay between economic development, economic impact results, property tax revenue, in the resulting property value impacts that will come as a result of the project. Many people in a hearing and so forth are looking at those projects and saying, oh, this is going to be a negative for these surrounding areas. And I get the concern that people have because their home typically is their largest single asset. And they're worried that a project moving in nearby is going to lower the value of their home in the community and what they can resell it for. And they want to have a say in that. But I think there's also this counterbalancing force that says there's going to be additional tax dollars that will service these communities that absent the project that they couldn't invest in. When you go to schools, and I don't know how many schools that I've been to over the summer doing teacher training where they have no air conditioning, and the boys' bathroom in the elementary school looks like it did when I was going to elementary school and things. So there's a needs for infrastructure. And next slide. So I think I want to make a differentiation because sometimes there is confusion where we'll get asked to do a property value study, and as you heard, that's different from the analyses that we do at SER. Property value studies looks at that price impact for the existing properties surrounding typically residential properties from a wind, solar, transmission, battery storage, what have you, project coming into a community. Whereas economic impact analysis is really related to the new jobs and earnings increase that will increase the demand and the ability to pay for that housing. So as you have more employment, as you have more people making money, they can afford more and better housing to go into a community, and oftentimes that gets overlooked. There's also, as we mentioned on the last slide, this property tax revenue that will be used for services that will then make the community a more attractive place to reside in. So the methodologies and the expertise are related, but they are distinct. And so we just wanted to make that differentiation, because oftentimes we do get inquiries at SER about, can you do a property value study? And really we're focused on property economic impact and property taxes, which can be confusing. So I'll turn it over to Ethan, but I do have a question for our other panelists. If I could take one of the first questions But I'll let you wrap things up before we get to the Q&A.
Yeah, thanks to all of our presenters for the presentation, and we will move into our Q&A portion of the webinar. So panelists, feel free to turn your cameras back on and mic on, and we will respond to some of these questions. But yeah, Dave, feel free to ask our panelists your question.
Yeah, I was just wondering if you could kind of outline what you see as the pros and cons. I see from a kind of what Gilbert and Sampson have done in terms of the published study, as I understand it, is more of an econometric approach, looking at the price components versus Mike, as an appraiser, you're doing a matched pair analysis. So when you're looking at those two methodologies, could you kind of give a pro and a con for when are they most appropriate and what are the difficulties associated with each?
You want me to take it first? So in a perfect world, an abundance of information of matched pairs would basically solve the problems. The reality, because of the lack of density, the lack of turnover, the lack of transactions, that the matched pair on its own needs support. And that's why we do the assessor studies and the peer-reviewed studies and also looking at your infrastructure reports, just to, basically have great data sets to come to a conclusion. I've found that to come in, or somebody has come in with a published study, which they try and do quite a bit of a broad area in a negative fashion. The local communities think their communities are the best, the most important, the most relative. And if you come in with just a published studies that doesn't look at their market, doesn't understand their market, they basically look at the expert as a carpetbagger. So that's a concern. But I think what Sampson and Gilbert do are incredibly important, and it's incredibly important data. But we have to look at all of it just to kind of overcome, let's say, some local political and personal issues.
Yeah, I'd echo what Mike said and just add that it's hard to do this work, and it takes a lot of time with that level of granularity of looking at project by project specifics and doing some of this match pair analysis. But the pro, of course, is that we can make broad observations for an entire region like the Midwest, right? And so when people are looking at like what are the prospective impacts in lieu of an actual site-specific study being done, it maybe helps with those broader observations for local officials and others to think about. And to the point that Sampson made and we've made in our presentation is, as this research is developing, studies have been done in Rhode Island and Texas and California, et cetera. But like thinking about a project that might be going in the Dakotas or Minnesota or somewhere in our region in the Midwest, maybe this is something that we can look at and derive some observations that might be of interest. So.
Well, great. And I see some interesting discussion here in the Q&A feature. So attendees, if you have more questions, feel free to drop those in. But I am going to field some of these questions and just kind of read aloud. And Sampson, maybe you can either read your response or kind of elaborate upon what you've already written here. But the first question here I see is from Francisca. She says, do you have any insights on how standalone battery energy storage systems can impact property values, or any plan to conduct a similar study for BESS? So Sampson, feel free to either read your response that you put in here in the chat or elaborate on that.
Yeah, I've actually had this discussion with many assessors, truly just to understand that, like, we are in a stage for battery development just like 10 to 15 years ago, where we are with utility scale solar, um, but with even more complexity, right? So, you know, um, unlike solar battery, you could have different durations, which, 4-hour BESS would have a different inverter counts than 2-hour BESS, than 8-hour BESS. The setup would be very different. Technology, you have zinc, iron flow, lithium ion, even lithium ion, you have different types nowadays, and one thing that even as a developer myself, I cannot ignore is that battery storage, if installed not properly, occasionally, which happens rarely, but it does have fire risk, right? So it is truly a case by case assessment. Right now, I for BESS. So yeah, I mean, it's very unique, and it's definitely very different than how we evaluate utility scale solar.
Yeah. Anything more to add from the other panelists, or we can go on to the next question? One of the more recent questions here says, infrastructure begets infrastructure. What analysis or study are you aware of to support not only the direct impacts of the project, as well as what would be tangentially related to that project, substation that would be built by the transmission owner, network upgrades that support otherwise growth in the area, et cetera? And Sampson, I see you responded, and Dave, maybe you could talk a little bit about how we do incorporate those cost categories into our analysis. But Sampson, you want to kick us off there?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, network upgrade, uh, what we mean by network upgrade, usually, right, the general impact of the grid that usually goes up to miles and miles in terms of distance from the project itself. So that's usually almost always paid by the developers, with few exceptions. And facility upgrade, which is essentially paying for the substation, utility switchyard, and such, that is also almost always paid by developers, with few exceptions. In addition to those, developers often help with, roads that they use during construction, help to upgrade or at least maintain those roads, as well as, bridges nearby, or, if the project requires some railroad crossing, there's usually maintenance over there as well. So yeah, there are a lot of areas that developer help with, in the close proximity of the project location.
Yeah, I think this is an excellent point. It is true, and we do try and quantify those in our studies. If we know that there's going to be network upgrades that are involved, whether the developer pays for them or whether it's utility paid, it's going to get done. And then that's a benefit to the local community in terms of those jobs and earnings that'll flow into that community. But not only those types of things that were mentioned, but I've talked with union officials where they've said that they've just noted anecdotally that a couple years after a wind farm comes in, typically the school will go and build a new school building, or there'll be a major renovation because they can borrow against the future revenues that are flowing to the school district as a result of this project. So they wait till it's come in, and then where they can see that flow of revenue. And so oftentimes the local unions will get a second go round in terms of building the school and school infrastructure. And you can see how that would play out in roads and other taxing entities as they have this more money. We don't quantify those impacts that are kind of secondary or tertiary that follow as other actors are doing things as a result of a project coming into a community. So we try and be conservative in the economic benefits, community benefits that'll flow, but But that is true that infrastructure is going to beget infrastructure, and it's not just energy infrastructure, it's going to be other things that I think will benefit the community.
Well, great. I know we're at time here, but I did just want to open it up to our panelists. If there's any other questions that you see here in the Q&A that you wanted to speak to before we have to um, kind of leave here. Anything else from our panelists before we sign off?
I can touch base real quick on the ADLS, which I've been following. And it's interesting that a lot of projects have been permitted, but the actual implementation of it is taken a while. It takes a while to get the approval, from the FAA. But in looking at it, when you drive into an existing project, and the lights are on, you don't feel it because the lights are pointing up. However, you can see them from probably 10, 15 miles away. And I think it, reflects a connotation to it. When it's complete and they're operating and they're around, and let's say you have a state like Iowa or Illinois that have significant projects, the newer projects are going to have far less turbines and they're going to have the ADLS, and I think it's going to have a very positive impact on those areas and probably increase property values more.
All right, well, great. Thank you to all of our panelists for the presentations and answering questions. And thanks to all of our attendees for the engagement and sticking with us here to the end. As a reminder, the recording of this webinar will be available. We will send that out to all registrants once we've got that online. So thanks again, everyone, and have a good rest of your Thursday.